Welcome to Return on Intelligence on Markets Plus, presented by the BMO Institute for Applied Artificial Intelligence and Quantum. I'm Kristin Milchanowski, Chief AI and Quantum Officer at BMO. In this series, I sit down with global technology leaders to explore the future of innovation, data, and AI, and what it all means for decision makers in financial services. That's why I'm thrilled to be joined by Mona Malone, Chief Administrative Officer, Chief Human Resources Officer, and Head of People, Culture and Brand, BMO Financial Group. Mona, you and I come from different angles. Strategy, people, governance, all of these different outcomes. So how do you turn all of this information and all of this momentum around AI into real advantage?
Thanks, Kristin. I'm so excited to be here at the first episode presented by the BMO Institute for Applied Artificial Intelligence and Quantum. And I just love your framing. You know, this is all about making progress and sustainable competitive advantage. And I think delivering on the promise of AI requires all of us individually and in terms of being senior leaders to think deeply about how we're navigating this change. What's changing? What's the potential? And how are business models evolving to really capture value? You know, as leaders, we've led transformational change before in the past, and as BMO, we're a 209-year-old bank. We've navigated significant technological change. The question is, are we taking those learnings and adapting them to the current situation, both as individuals as we're learning with our teams and the bank overall as we're navigating the evolution of our business models to deliver more value to our customers?
It's really about rethinking how we measure the AI value, and that is what gets me so excited to be here and to talk about this with you. You know, the traditional ROI, so the traditional return on investment frameworks, they don't always capture that value that AI actually creates. So when we think through how leaders should start thinking differently about measuring the value of intelligence or these AI programs and initiatives in the organizations, what are some of the things that you're thinking about and having us do different?
Well, first of all, I think you've put your finger on exactly the right question to be asking. Everything right now is the money being spent on technology and innovation, and where are the returns coming from? And the pressure on organizations to show the return on investment. And the feeling of employees around having to adopt new tools and be more productive at the individual level and at the team level. But what I love about the question that you're asking is really this return on intelligence. And the two concepts that come in when I think about intelligence are trust and judgment. So not only is there a question about, are we deploying technology and changing the way we're working and thinking about our processes to automate, to augment human capacity, to create personalized experiences for our customers and deliver more value? But are we also recognizing the importance of trust and that the outputs that we're creating must build the trust in the organization for customers and with employees in terms of the employee value proposition? I also think the balance of where human judgment comes into the loop with the automation, data, and technology, and where you're using human judgment, whether that's in designing the AI governance framework, whether that's the human in the loop on decisioning, or whether that is in the actual change management approaches you're using in your organization to create the sense of opportunity and career growth for individuals.
Mona, I absolutely love that framing of how you look at the career growth even, that including that part in the equation is so important. The actual value of AI is not just in those tasks that it automates, and we're really seeing that the value is in how intelligence is compounding across an organization. And so to do that at scale requires everything that you just talked about being in sync together, kind of like a perfect orchestra, really. On the AI agent side, we're seeing that the nuance of that. So what's different? The nuance of what AI agents are is that they're not here just to execute. That's what's so new about what AI agents are. They observe, and those observations become intelligence for the organization. And that insight then can turn into an asset for the firm. And so how do we catapult ourselves to capture as much of that opportunity as possible? And so that real AI value is in what it reveals, not just what it automates. The hidden inefficiencies, every organization has its bottlenecks, the missed revenue opportunities. Those all can surface through some of these pattern detections that we're seeing available to us with the AI agents. And so at an enterprise scale, 1% improvement on efficiency is material. Right, Mona?
Kristin, I think what you've really laid out is that we're only at the early innings in the baseball game around AI, and that there's so much more potential. I want to ask you a question. If you had to pick one decision that we're making at the organizational level about AI that will really matter in the next 5 to 6 years, what is it? And what keeps you up at night as you think about it?
The one decision that we're making that I'm most proud of for our organization, Mona, is hands down that we are designing an AI program with empathy. Innovation without empathy is merely efficiency without trust. And our clients and our executives, our teammates, we don't just adopt these tools. We really are creating them so that we can function with them, coexist with them together. And so that empathetic design really means developing something that the end user, whether that's a teammate or a client, it's what they want, and that it looks like embedding trust signals for our clients. That also looks like coding in simple confirmations for the user. It also looks like using predictable user interface behavior. And so those transparent and logical workflows really are at the center of this empathetic design. And these are simple examples, but they create those micro moments of trust that are so important to banking, but then also to user buy-in. Governance is a fundamental part of design. Trust is earned when leadership can say with certainty that we know precisely how this agent behaves. We know where it draws its boundaries and how it's going to be monitored. And without governance, even the most advanced agent can become a liability or a compliance risk or a political issue. So at BMO, our first step towards empathy by design was publishing our responsible AI principles, which is to build with empathy, manage with integrity, and optimize for trust.
Those responsible AI principles are a foundation, and you've spoke about them really being the rock upon which everything else is built. Kristin, when you spoke about build with empathy, what I've seen is how that comes to life in terms of the real cross-functional work that's required with the AI scientists, the data scientists, our business leaders, and that cross-functional working group and how the design thinking that comes through that expertise can both reduce friction points for customers, but also tap into the deep expertise and judgment of our employees.
So, Mona, it's really hard to just pick one, but I absolutely love your reflection on that banker-scientist relationship and that coordination. I really think that's also a major part of what makes us so unique and quite powerful as a team at BMO is because of that cross collaboration. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, the governance experts, the understanding the technology, but then also the change management. How are we involving people? How are we thinking about upskilling our workforce? And how are we honoring the judgment and intelligence with the current workforce as we redesign workflows, taking advantage of the most benefits that technology can offer with AI?
That's great. So we started to talk about responsible AI, and responsible adoption comes up in every serious AI conversation, and I'm really proud of that. And AI responsibility is governance, it's risk, it's trust, and it's often what leaders need for board level comfort. How do you think about that in a practical way, Mona?
I think that innovation is critical, right? Innovation is progress at the micro level as individuals. Growth is learning, and growth is incredibly important to our own progress and for any company to compete. And sustainable competition over time, it needs to innovate and reinvent itself over time. I think about prudent innovation. And the reason I use that word prudent is it's about really thinking about the accountability of the decisions that we're making and not sacrificing institutional trust for speed. And we've seen that in a variety of different industries over time. And I think it's really important when we think about the role that we play in financial services around consumer and business trust, to innovate and redefine, but recognize the importance of that institutional trust. And we're really doing two things. We're safeguarding our brand and our reputation, but we're also trying to create an environment that rewards innovation. And innovation in the small scale with leaders and teams every day, but also determining where you're going to dramatically change how you operate and do business, where there may be profit pools at risk or new opportunities for growth and investment that you can take advantage of as a result of the technology that's now available. And I think that is what's important. But asking yourself, when you come up with a new product or a new process or service design, what must be true for me to really trust this output? And we need to be really asking that question at scale across the organization as we think about this degree of change.
Mona, we are talking about trust and even just now speed. And one of the things that we have seen is that strong controls and transparency really does improve speed. It doesn't actually slow it down. Trust is that thing that is built when you provide the clarity to our people, and that clarity is around what is AI used for, what's it not used for. Sometimes the opposite of that question is also as vital as asking what is something for versus what it's not for. So those strong governance guardrails is giving business stakeholders the confidence to scale technology and make development easier with those clear parameters that we're setting up. I've also found in conversation with our business partners that design is persuasion. And there's this conscious, continuous exercise in building trust, minimizing friction, and enhancing familiarity. And that design becomes a proxy for integrity. And so I really value being able to work side by side, that again, going back to that banker-scientist collaboration. But you're talking about it too, Mona. It is so vital to the program that we're doing and this playbook that we have for value capture. It's not just the technology, it really is the human component to this and the subject matter expertise of our teammates.
Now, you talked about value capture. Let's stick on that for a little bit. There's a lot of pressure around value capture. And sometimes people think about AI as a tool that can help them go faster, or a tool that can help orchestrate a process in a different way, agent deployment, agent factories of agents doing work. And tell me more about how you think about value capture and what the playbook really in the book shared with you about data really being the foundation, the importance of operating model. But what's the linchpin to getting the value capture at scale in an organization?
In the book, I talk about the 10 moves that really capture this, Mona. And to highlight a few, AI success hinges not just on speed that we were talking about earlier, but really on clear direction, precision, and this governance. And at BMO, our CEO has an A30 strategy, and we're digital first, we're AI-powered business for value and future readiness. And so, unsurprisingly, the first strategic move is to really anchor AI to business value. And that means understanding what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to move that needle for the company, whether it's a very specific cost takeout that you're trying to achieve or new product, new revenue generation activity that you're trying to achieve, by getting very clear on what the outcome is, and that outcome is serving a real business value. And that is by far the single most important first step.
And I think I've seen that in action. You can fall in love with the tool or fall in love with what you think it might be able to do. And you often ask business leaders the question of, what are you trying to achieve? And really deeply understanding customer friction points, where the value add is that they're trying to bring to the market, and then designing the business processes and utilizing the technology to achieve those outcomes.
That's absolutely right. So it means designing the agents and the workflows so that the path from first use is measurable impact. And that's as frictionless as possible. And so the AI needs to not just be powerful, but also an unburden to the end user. In the book, one of the concepts introduced is reimagining the organization and the future of work. And from your position as CHRO, what are some of the more key decision frameworks or concept areas that you're really focused on that other leaders listening will also want to pay attention to? Because we're really changing the way the workplace is designed.
As CHRO, first of all, understanding, who had accountabilities to set the governance frame for the work is really important. But also, where are we going to be using agents and where are we using humans? Where's the most business value possible in it? And what work is going to change and evolve over time? Also thinking about, how are we tracking where agents are doing work? Do we know? Are we tracking that in our HR system? What work are they doing? How are we orienting those agents to the work? And over time, how are we performance managing them? And what if something goes wrong? Also thinking about how humans and agents work together. If there's a sense of fear in the workplace, that's going to create issues. So how do we create an environment where people feel open and want to learn new tools and learn new things, but also recognize work will be done in new ways? So there, you need to have a sense of embracing, trying new learning and tools. You need to reward people for doing that. And you need to recognize a sense of career progression that might look in a different way. I think also one of the things we thought about was protecting apprenticeship. As different tasks go away and are done in different ways, what's that going to do to traditional career development and apprenticeship models? And how do you ensure that 10 years from now or 15 years from now, you're going to have the leadership succession pipeline in the organization that you need? And as work changes and adapts, how does that change your talent development and learning and succession strategies? I also think one of the things that helps create an environment that isn't fear but is more curiosity is really focusing on learning to use AI, learning to prompt like a pro, we called it, and our AI training for all. Those were all examples of change management strategies to help bring the workforce along in evolving and thinking about new ways of doing work. Tell me a little bit about the concepts of, you mentioned effortless is everything, Principle 17 in the book. And I just want to hear a little bit more about what that means. Effortless is everything. What do you mean by effortless?
Everything that we do with AI in our lives hinges on perception. So how easy does this tool make me feel? How easy does it help me do or take the next step? And that perception is also about how easy does it feel like I'm going to achieve the value that I'm trying to achieve. And so it means designing those agents and workflows from that first principle of measuring the impact, like we said earlier, but then also from a user standpoint, we want them to enjoy it. We want it to be flawless for them. We want it to be effortless because we're going to be moving into this era, and we already are moving into this era of the humans and the agents working alongside together. And when we work alongside together, that interactivity or that interaction needs to feel effortless. And then the more effortless something feels, the easier it is to adopt it and to embed it into your daily life, your daily routine. And so that's why the principle exists and why it's so important is because you do need to design for just that, the ease of use.
Well, and that is so interesting and even links a bit to the longer term concepts that we've been talking about around employee wellness when we think about a workforce with agents and humans working together, and how you think about that balance for humans of the benefit of cognitive offloading of tasks, but also overload that can sometimes happen and how you're balancing that over time. All right, let's focus a little bit on talent and skills. This is a topic that you and I have talked a lot about.
Mona, there's nobody in this world better than you to talk about this topic. So let's go to talent. That's where most of the day-to-day change is going to show up, is with our people. Mona, your leadership is vital in this conversation. So what's your view on the skills leaders and teams need the most in this data-saturated, nearly AI-saturated economy?
I think leadership skills are critical because what you're managing is large-scale change, people, process, technology. And the leaders themselves are coming up to speed on technology, data, literacy. They're using new tools in their day-to-day life, and they're having to redesign business models with the art of the possible in terms of these new technologies and data. And so the sense of reinvention of business is really important at a micro level. Capability building, both for themselves and for their employees, become really important. And doing that at scale, reducing fear, creating a safe environment for people to try new tools and adopt them. Really understanding if there is impact from the work that's being done. So recognizing when a particular initiative isn't showing the impact and readjusting and pivoting and moving to another initiative. Looking at how you're redesigning work end to end. And for many organizations that are still organized quite functionally, this can be quite a significant change management task. And this can involve orchestrating work across various areas of an organization. I think it involves an enormous amount of curiosity. And one of the things that you've done with our leadership team is hands-on keyboard learning in terms of increasing the capability of really understanding the power of the tools in our own day-to-day life, but then recognizing how critical it is that you're also doing the strategic planning of thinking about how you're going to redesign your business, what friction points, what business problems you're actually solving for clients, for certain segments in service delivery to make interacting with the bank better for customers and to make processes much easier for employees.
AI literacy for leaders is also really important. This is something that you and I have talked a lot about, Mona. Asking better questions, interpreting the outputs, and also knowing the limits. And that's almost a new muscle to a degree. I think that our leaders have always been exceptional about asking solid questions and interpreting business outcomes. And so it's just an extension now of doing those things with the technology as well, and not just trusting the output of the model but really making sure that the outcome of that model is something that makes good business sense. So it's really developing a new muscle, isn't it, Mona?
It's absolutely that. And, that sense of responsibility of, we've been working with machine learning and models for many years. But that sense of, as you have more and more algorithms running different aspects of your business, do you understand what's underneath of them? How do you think about performance management for your agent workforce? How do you think about when things are going wrong, when you need to pivot? And how are you ensuring the orientation of your agents, as you and I have talked about, is in a way that you want them acting in terms of empathy and in terms of tone? And you've often used the example, the very simple example with me, that sometimes 1 + 1 can equal 2, but 1 + 1 can also be pink. And how do you anticipate where those outcomes are going to be far different than what you think? And how do you govern around that in an organization when you're talking about really important outputs that are based on trust around helping our customers make real financial progress and our employees in terms of trusting the processes to help them do their jobs better? Now, Kristin, what's one practical thing that our listeners can do next week to move from information to intelligence in terms of how they're thinking about AI?
Mona, one of the things that you and I talk about often is audit the margins. And we hinted on it earlier, but what I mean by that is pick one reoccurring decision that you make in your day, in your week, and really think critically about that repetitive nature and what inputs matter. What's the noise around that activity? What would help speed things up? Or if it's something that goes too fast, what would help intentionally slow it down? So auditing the margins, looking for value at that margin is what I mean by that. And that is one of the things that leaders can take to their desk Monday morning. Also, identify where AI could help reduce cycle time or improve quality. Sometimes, or often, what AI agents can do is actually improve quality, reduce risk. So that's another place to think of when you're auditing your margins, is where could that benefit lie? And also talk to your team about how we're going to use AI, what's going to get checked, what's going to get verified. But then, are you building the muscle today? How are you interacting today with AI? Start building it into your daily use and just increase your usage with it on a more regular basis. That's something else that we can do, is just commit to leaning in a Monday morning. And the critical question we can ask is, how do you generate more value in a world where intelligence is abundant?
And intelligence is abundant and at your fingertips. But the question, is it intelligence or just information? How do you know that? And how do you know it at scale as you're using it in an organization? This is so interesting, Kristin, because I think focusing on business problems, where there's friction, where there's wasted time, where you want to deliver more value to your customer is a great place to start. And then the very personal advice that you've given, which is the use of the tools. And you've shared with me, the importance of really enhancing how I'm using prompts and what I'm telling the AI about me that helps increase the very individual outputs that I'm getting. When you think of this on scale, you've described really understanding the decision inputs needed. And when you think about those decisions that we're making, you're understanding the data inputs and you're understanding the judgment inputs. And what you've really described is a more clear understanding of that mapping is really part of the more critical and effective use of AI to really produce intelligence at scale.
Mona, this was a perfect way to start the series because it's the real leadership conversation right now. It's not just about can we use AI, but it's how we turn it into responsible, durable advantage. So I really want to thank you for your time and the listeners' time for coming on and being with me today.
Thanks, Kristin, so much for having me on the first episode of Return on Intelligence. I think the concepts couldn't be more timely as we think about how technology, organizations, and leadership come together for sustainable advantage and do it in a way that really does produce a return on intelligence.
Thanks for listening to Return on Intelligence on Markets Plus, presented by the BMO Institute for Applied Artificial Intelligence and Quantum. In the next episodes, we'll continue exploring the future of AI, data, and innovation, and what it means in practice. Thank you for listening. I'll see you all back here for the next episode of Return on Intelligence. Chat soon.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and may not necessarily represent those of BMO Capital Markets, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.